A mother lost both her children in seconds. The killer? A 21-year-old with a history everyone saw coming. 3 years later, she made a decision that shocked the world. She walked into a maximum security prison and did something that left grown men in tears, something that destroyed her own family, something the internet called the ultimate betrayal. The backlash was instant. Death threats flooded her mailbox. Her own sister stopped speaking to her. Strangers called her the worst mother in America, but she stood by her choice. Because what happened in that prison room revealed a truth about justice that nobody expected. A truth so powerful it changed everything. What did she do that caused such outrage? Why did her decision tear her family apart? And what did she discover that made it all worth it? Before we dive into this shocking story, hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments. Could you ever forgive your child's killer? This story will make you question everything. It was 11:47 p.m. on Friday, March 8, 2019. Spring break was in full swing, and downtown was alive with the sound of college students celebrating another weekend. Two children, 9-year-old Emma and 6-year-old Tyler, were returning from their aunt's house with their babysitter. It should have been routine, a 5-minute drive through familiar neighborhoods, streetlights casting gentle shadows on quiet suburban roads. But 3 blocks from home, at the intersection of Oak and Riverside, everything changed. A silver Mustang convertible came screaming through the red light at nearly 80 miles per hour. Witnesses described it as a missile, music blasting, sparks flying from where it had scraped a guardrail moments before. The impact was catastrophic. The family's SUV was launched 15 feet through the air before crashing into a lamppost. The sound, metal twisting, glass exploding, then silence, would haunt neighbors for years. Mrs. Rodriguez, who lived on the corner, was the first to call 911. "There are children!" she sobbed into the phone. "Oh God, there are children everywhere!" When first responders arrived, they found a scene that would stay with them forever. 2 small bodies thrown clear of the wreckage, a babysitter trapped but alive, and in the Mustang, slouched over the steering wheel, a 21-year-old college student named Dylan Hayes. Emma and Tyler Martinez were pronounced dead at 12:23 a.m. Their mother, Isabella Martinez, was 800 miles away at a work conference. She would learn of her children's deaths from a phone call that came at 1:15 in the morning. Dylan Hayes wasn't supposed to be behind the wheel that night. Earlier that evening, he'd been kicked out of 3 different bars for being too intoxicated to serve. Security footage from the last establishment showed him stumbling through the parking lot, fumbling with his keys while friends tried to take them away. But Dylan was used to getting his way. At 21, he was already known around campus as the guy who threw the wildest parties, who always had the best drugs, who lived like consequences were for other people. His Instagram from that night told the story. Shots lined up on a bar, a video of him pouring vodka directly into his mouth, a caption that read, "YOLO Friday. Who's ready to rage?" Blood tests later revealed his BAC was .24, 3 times the legal limit. Traces of cocaine and Adderall were found in his system. His phone showed he'd been texting while driving, sending laughing, crying emojis to friends just minutes before the crash. At the scene, officers found Dylan conscious but barely coherent. His first words weren't about the children he'd killed, they were complaints about his car. "My dad's gonna kill me," he slurred to the paramedic checking his vitals. That was a brand new Mustang. It took 3 attempts before anyone could get him to understand that 2 children were dead. When it finally registered, witnesses say he laughed. Not from joy, but from the kind of shocked disbelief that comes when reality crashes through a wall of alcohol and arrogance. "No way," he kept repeating. "No fucking way. This can't be real." But it was, and the laughing stopped when the handcuffs clicked shut. Isabella Martinez was in her hotel room in Chicago when her phone rang. She'd been reviewing presentation notes for the next morning, thinking about how proud Emma and Tyler would be when she came home with the promotion she was hoping to secure. She'd promised to take them to Disneyland with her first bonus check. The call came from her sister Maria, but the voice was wrong, broken. barely recognizable through sobs. "Bella, you need to come home. There's been an accident." The flight home was the longest 4 hours of Isabella's life. No details, just Maria's words on repeat. "Come home, just come home." At the airport, she saw Maria's face and knew. Even before the words came, she knew. "They're gone, Bella. Emma and Tyler, they're gone." The next days blurred together. Funeral arrangements, insurance calls, well-meaning neighbors bringing casseroles she couldn't eat. A house suddenly too quiet, filled with toys that would never be played with again. Emma's backpack still by the front door, homework half finished on the kitchen table. Tyler's superhero cape draped over his bedroom chair, waiting for adventures that would never come. Isabella, who had built her life around bedtime stories and soccer practices, school pickups and birthday parties, suddenly had nothing to fill the silence. Some nights she sat in their rooms, surrounded by the remnants of interrupted childhoods, and screamed until her throat was raw. Other nights she couldn't make any sound at all. The hardest part wasn't the pain, it was the realization that the pain would never end. There would be no getting over it, no return to normal, just learning to breathe in a world where her children no longer existed. The courtroom was packed on the day of Dylan Hayes' sentencing hearing. By then, the case had attracted national attention, not just because of the tragic deaths, but because of who Dylan was. The son of a prominent local businessman, a college student with no prior record, someone the media kept describing as having made a terrible mistake. Prosecutors painted a different picture. They showed the court Dylan's social media history, months of posts glorifying drunk driving, videos of him doing shots behind the wheel, bragging about never getting caught. This wasn't a mistake, the DA argued. This was a pattern of reckless behavior that finally caught up with him. And 2 innocent children paid the price. Security footage from the bars was played for the jury. Dylan stumbling, arguing with bouncers, ignoring friends who tried to take his keys. The timeline was clear. He had multiple opportunities to make a different choice. Then came the toxicology reports, the phone records, the crash reconstruction showing he never even touched the brakes. Dylan's defense team tried to paint him as a young man struggling with addiction, someone who needed treatment, not prison. Character witnesses spoke of his volunteer work, his academic achievements, his plans to become a social worker. But when Isabella finally took the stand for victim impact statements, the courtroom fell silent. She didn't scream, she didn't rage. Instead, she spoke quietly about bedtime stories that would never be finished, about graduations that would never happen, about grandchildren she would never hold. "Dylan Hayes stole my future," she said, her voice steady despite the tears. "Every birthday, every Christmas, every ordinary Tuesday, he took it all away with one selfish choice." She looked directly at Dylan for the first time. He was crying, his head in his hands. "I hope you understand what you've done," she said. "Not just to Emma and Tyler, but to everyone who loved them. That pain doesn't end when this trial does." The judge sentenced Dylan to 15 years in state prison. For Isabella, it felt both like justice and like nothing at all. No sentence could bring her children back. Dylan Hayes entered Riverside Correctional Facility 3 months after sentencing. Prison was a shock to someone who'd never faced real consequences. The son of privilege, who'd spent his life in fraternity houses and country clubs, suddenly found himself sharing an 8x10 cell with a man serving time for armed robbery. The first months were brutal. Other inmates knew his charges, and in prison hierarchy, drunk drivers who killed children rank just above child molesters. He was jumped twice in his first month, once requiring stitches. For his own protection, he was moved to administrative segregation, essentially solitary confinement. 23 hours a day in a concrete box, with 1 hour for exercise in a small caged yard. The silence was devastating. For someone who'd filled his life with parties and noise and constant stimulation, the quiet forced him to confront what he'd done for the first time without the buffer of alcohol or drugs. Prison records show Dylan's behavior was erratic in those early months. He was written up for destroying prison property, for verbal altercations with guards, for what one report called emotional outbursts inconsistent with institutional safety. But gradually, something changed. He began attending AA meetings in the prison chapel. He signed up for grief counseling, not mandated but voluntary. He started writing in journals, pages and pages of thoughts he'd never had the courage to face. Most significantly, he began writing letters, not to friends or family, but to Isabella Martinez, letters he never sent. Every week for 2 years, Dylan would write to the mother of the children he'd killed. Apologies that felt inadequate, explanations that sounded like excuses even to him, promises he wasn't sure he could keep. The letters piled up in his cell, unsent confessions to someone he'd never had the courage to face. He was terrified that reaching out would cause her more pain, but he was equally terrified that staying silent meant she would never know how sorry he was. While Dylan struggled with guilt behind bars, Isabella faced the harder task of learning to live without her children. She took leave from work. Indefinitely, her boss said, "Take all the time you need." But time wasn't the issue. The issue was that everything reminded her of what she'd lost. The grocery store where she'd bought their favorite snacks, the school where she'd volunteered in Emma's classroom, the park where Tyler learned to ride his bike. Even her own house, with their rooms exactly as they'd left them, became a museum of grief. Some days she couldn't get out of bed. Others she cleaned obsessively, as if scrubbing hard enough could somehow scrub away the reality of their deaths. Friends and family tried to help, but their comfort felt hollow. "They're in a better place," people would say. God needed angels. As if her children's death served some cosmic purpose that made the pain worthwhile. The anger came in waves, rage at Dylan, at the bars that kept serving him, at the friends who let him drive, at God, at herself for being 800 miles away when her children needed her most. Some nights, she would drive to the intersection where the crash happened. A memorial had grown there, flowers, stuffed animals, photos of Emma and Tyler. She would sit in her car and imagine what those last moments were like. Did they see the headlights coming? Were they scared? The not knowing was almost worse than the knowing. 2 years after the crash, Isabella was diagnosed with severe PTSD. She couldn't sleep without medication. She couldn't drive past certain intersections. The sound of screeching tires would send her into panic attacks that left her gasping for air. She was surviving, but she wasn't living. 3 years after the crash, Isabella received a letter from the prison. Not from Dylan. She would have thrown that away unopened. This was from the chaplain of the Restorative Justice Program at Riverside Correctional Facility. The letter explained the program's mission: giving victims' families the opportunity to meet face-to-face with offenders, to ask questions that haunted them, to seek understanding or closure or whatever it was they needed. Participation is entirely voluntary, the chaplain wrote. Many families choose not to participate, and that choice is completely respected. But if you're interested in learning more, we'd like to speak with you. Isabella's first instinct was to burn the letter, meet with Dylan Hayes, sit in the same room as the man who'd stolen her children's lives while he was too drunk to even remember their names. The idea was obscene, but as weeks passed, she found herself thinking about it. Not about forgiveness, that felt impossible, but about questions that had eaten at her for 3 years. Did he remember the crash? Did he think about Emma and Tyler? Did he even understand what he'd taken from the world? More than anything, she wanted him to know who her children really were. Not just names in a police report, but Emma, with her gap-toothed smile and her dream of becoming a veterinarian. Tyler with his superhero obsession and his habit of leaving his socks everywhere. If Dylan was going to carry their deaths for the rest of his life, he should at least know who they really were. Against everyone's advice, her sister, her therapist, her priest, Isabella wrote back to the chaplain, "I want to meet him." The meeting took place in a small room inside Riverside Correctional Facility. No cameras, no lawyers, just a table, 2 chairs, and a guard stationed outside the door. Isabella arrived first. She'd barely slept the night before, alternating between anticipation and terror. She brought with her a small photo album, pictures of Emma and Tyler from birth to their last school photos. When Dylan was brought in, she almost didn't recognize him. The cocky college kid from the news reports was gone. 3 years of prison had aged him in ways that went beyond physical appearance. He was thinner, quieter, his eyes carrying a weight that hadn't been there before. He sat down across from her, hands shaking slightly. For a long moment, neither spoke. Isabella broke the silence. "Look at me," she said. Dylan raised his eyes to meet hers. She could see he was fighting back tears. "I want you to see what you did," she continued, opening the photo album. "This is Emma. She was 9 years old. She wanted to be a veterinarian because she couldn't stand to see any creature suffer." She turned the page. "This is Tyler. He was 6. He believed superheroes were real because I told him his daddy was one before he died in Afghanistan." With each photo, Dylan's composure cracked a little more. By the time she reached their last school pictures, Emma missing her 2 front teeth, Tyler giving the camera a thumbs up, he was sobbing openly. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so fucking sorry. I know it doesn't mean anything, but I'm sorry." Isabella stared at him for a long moment. This broken young man across from her bore little resemblance to the arrogant kid who'd killed her children. Prison had changed him, or maybe it had just revealed who he really was underneath all the bravado. "Sorry doesn't bring them back," she said quietly. "I know," Dylan replied. "I know nothing I say can fix this, but I needed you to know that I think about them every day. I dream about them. I see their faces every time I close my eyes." It was then that Isabella made a choice that surprised even her. "I forgive you." The words came out before Isabella fully understood she was going to say them. Dylan's head snapped up, confusion and disbelief on his face. Even the guard outside the door seemed to pause. "I forgive you," she repeated, more deliberately this time. "Not because you deserve it, not because it makes what you did okay, but because I can't carry this hate anymore." Dylan was speechless, tears streaming down his face. Isabella continued, her voice growing stronger. "For 3 years, I've been dying alongside my children. The anger, the hatred, it's been killing me piece by piece, and Emma and Tyler wouldn't want that. They'd want me to live." She closed the photo album and looked directly at Dylan. "I forgive you so that I can survive this. Not for you, but for them. And for the part of me that still needs to be their mother, even though they're gone." The silence that followed was different from before. Not empty, but full of something neither of them had expected to find in that room. Dylan finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "No," Isabella agreed. "You don't. That's what makes it forgiveness." News of the meeting leaked within days, and the response was immediate and polarizing. Some hailed Isabella as a saint, a woman of extraordinary grace who had chosen healing over hatred. Op-eds praised her courage and used her story as an example of the power of forgiveness. Others were outraged. Online comments accused her of betraying her children's memory. Talk radio hosts debated whether any parent should ever forgive the person who killed their child. Some called her weak, others called her naive. Isabella ignored most of it. The forgiveness hadn't been for public consumption, it had been for survival. In the weeks that followed, something unexpected happened. For the first time since the crash, Isabella began to sleep through the night. The panic attacks became less frequent. She still grieved, she would always grieve, but the rage that had been consuming her began to loosen its grip. She started volunteering at a victims' advocacy group, helping other families navigate the legal system. She spoke at high schools about the consequences of drunk driving, always ending her presentations with photos of Emma and Tyler. "I didn't forgive Dylan Hayes because he deserved it," she would tell audiences. "I forgave him because hatred was killing me, and my children would want me to live." For Dylan, the forgiveness was both a gift and a burden. It freed him from the assumption that he was irredeemable, but it also meant he could no longer hide behind his guilt as an excuse for not changing. He completed his GED in prison. He became a facilitator in the addiction recovery program. He wrote letters, with Isabella's permission, to high schools, sharing his story as a cautionary tale. Most significantly, he began preparing for his eventual release, not as someone seeking to forget his past, but as someone determined to spend his remaining years making amends for what could never be undone. Dylan Hayes still has 6 years left on his sentence. Every morning he wakes up in the same concrete cell. Every night the lights go out at 10 p.m. sharp. The forgiveness Isabella gave him didn't change his sentence. It changed something harder to define. "The bars are still here," he wrote in a letter to the prison chaplain, "but the chains I put on myself, some of those are gone." He keeps the photo album Isabella left with him, with her permission, on his small desk. Emma and Tyler's faces remind him daily not just of what he took from the world, but of what he's responsible for carrying forward. The forgiveness didn't erase his crime. It didn't minimize his responsibility. But it gave him something he hadn't dared hope for: the possibility that his life, even after such devastating mistakes, might still have purpose. "I can't bring them back," he wrote in his latest letter to Isabella, letters they now exchange regularly. "But I can make sure their story saves other kids from making my mistakes. I can make sure their lives meant something more than just my crime." Prison records show that Dylan now speaks regularly to at-risk youth groups via video call, sharing his story as a warning about where addiction and reckless behavior can lead. He's been sober for 4 years, his longest stretch since he started drinking at 14. The man who enters those video calls bears no resemblance to the party boy who killed 2 children while driving drunk. Prison didn't just incarcerate him, it forced him to confront who he'd become and who he wanted to be. But every night, when the lights go out, he still sees their faces. What Isabella Martinez did in that prison room challenges everything we think we know about justice. In most crime stories, we expect anger. We expect victims' families to demand maximum sentences, to speak of hatred and revenge. We expect the moral universe to be clearly divided between good and evil, victim and perpetrator. But real life is more complicated than our narratives. Forgiveness didn't mean Isabella thought Dylan deserved mercy. It didn't mean she'd forgotten her children or minimized their deaths. It meant she'd chosen to stop letting his actions continue to destroy what remained of her life. "People ask me how I could forgive him," Isabella said in a later interview. "But they're asking the wrong question. The right question is, how could I not?" The alternative was dying alongside Emma and Tyler, and they wouldn't want that. For Isabella, forgiveness was practical, not philosophical. It was a tool for survival, not a statement about justice. The hate she'd carried for 3 years had become a second trauma, one that threatened to consume what was left of her capacity for joy, for love, for the simple act of being present in her own life. "I realized that Dylan Hayes had already taken my children," she explained. "I wasn't going to let him take me too." This story forces us to grapple with uncomfortable questions about what justice really means. The legal system gave Dylan Hayes 15 years in prison, a concrete punishment for a concrete crime. But was that justice for Emma and Tyler Martinez? Could any sentence be? What Isabella offered was something different, not legal justice, but moral possibility. The chance for redemption, not as erasure of the crime, but as transformation born from its weight. Justice isn't just about punishment, Isabella reflected. Sometimes it's about what we do with the broken pieces afterward. Dylan will serve his full sentence. He'll carry the weight of what he did for the rest of his life. But he'll carry it differently now, not as a burden that crushes him into inaction, but as a responsibility that demands he become someone worthy of the forgiveness he was given. Is that justice? There's no clear answer. What's clear is that forgiveness didn't diminish the crime or excuse the perpetrator. Instead, it created space for something new to grow from the wreckage, not healing in any complete sense, but the possibility of meaning beyond the meaningless deaths of 2 children. In the end, maybe that's what forgiveness really is, not the erasure of harm, but the refusal to let harm have the final word. Emma Martinez would have been 13 this year. Tyler would have been 10. Isabella still marks their birthdays, still visits their graves, still keeps their rooms exactly as they left them. Forgiveness didn't end her grief. Nothing will ever do that. But it ended her dying. Today, Isabella works full-time with victim advocacy groups, helping other families navigate the impossible terrain of sudden loss. She speaks at conferences about restorative justice, sharing her story with audiences who often struggle to understand her choice. Dylan Hayes still writes to her regularly, letters she sometimes answers, sometimes doesn't. He's scheduled for release in 2030, and they've discussed the possibility of continuing their work together, using their story to prevent other families from experiencing what they've endured. People think forgiveness is about the person who hurt you, Isabella said recently. But it's not. It's about who you choose to be afterward. She pauses, looking at the photos of Emma and Tyler that still sit on her mantle. My children were light in this world, pure light. And I realized that if I spent the rest of my life consumed by hate, their light would die with them. I couldn't let that happen. The choice Isabella Martinez made in that prison room to forgive the unforgivable didn't erase the crime or resurrect her children. But it did something else, something almost as profound. It refused to let their deaths be the end of their story. In a world where senseless tragedy often feels like the final word, maybe that refusal, the choice to create meaning from meaninglessness, to nurture life from the seeds of death, is its own kind of miracle. Emma and Tyler Martinez died in a moment of someone else's selfish recklessness. But their memory lives on in their mother's choice to love more than hate, to heal more than harm, to forgive even when forgiveness seems impossible. And in that choice, their light continues to shine. This is the story of a crime that changed everything, and a mother who chose not to let it define everything. Sometimes, the most powerful justice comes not from punishment, but from the courage to transform pain into purpose. That courage belongs to Isabella Martinez, and to the memory of Emma and Tyler, who deserved so much more than the few years they were given, but whose legacy now reaches far beyond the intersection where their young lives ended.